This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and it's about time. What do I mean? Well, remember the Dell Inspiron Gamer or Gaming Edition laptop? It didn't look like other Inspirons. It was really for a totally different crowd of people. So how was that ever an Inspiron? Well, Dell finally got a clue, helping you find what the gaming laptops are in their affordable line, not the Alienware line, and it's better for marketing. So now they have the Dell G3, G5, and G7. Now this one here is the G7, and each of those increments in going up the line or the food chain for this laptop is about $50 difference. So not a lot of difference. So right there, they're kind of making it easy upsell to just go with the G7, right? This is not much money. Anyway, the G5 and the G7 are pretty close to identical in terms of specs, and they look alike. The G3 is the one that's different. It looks like your everyday normal Ultrabook, and it's the only one that's available in both 15 and 17-inch sizes. The G5 and the G7 we have here are only available as 15-inch laptops. Oh, by the way, I know I sound congested and scratchy and all that sort of thing. I have a pretty bad sinus infection, so don't worry. We're going to look at it now. So the G7 does look a lot like the Inspiron Gaming Edition that's been available for a while. It has the same, I would say unique to the line kind of look there with that kind of linear radiator grill running across the back, the curved sloping of the sides that comes kind of to a little pinch. It's a nice enough looking laptop. We have the alpine white one. Obviously, there's also the licorice black edition, which is kind of a matte black. It blends in more. None of them look super duper gamery, other than that grill on the back, which has gray plastic, so your eye goes to it a little bit. And the lid color is the only thing that's affected by your color choice. The interior and the bottom are always black, probably because they would get dirty over time and it would be pretty hard to keep them clean. The laptop is about 25 millimeters thick, which is about 1 inch, so it's on the slim side. A lot of this is going to seem like your basic 2017 gaming laptop. And for the price, that's kind of fair. You're not going to get the cutting-edge 2018 stuff like the no-bezel design and all that sort of thing when you're talking half the price. Premium gaming laptops that are thin and light cost about $2,000. This one, our nicely configured one, is about $1,049. In terms of weight, it's not really a lightweight, though compared to an Alienware it is, because Alienwares are typically some of the heaviest gaming laptops. It weighs 5.79 pounds, which is about 2.63 kilograms, so not horrible. Of course, it has a pretty beefy AC charger. Which charger you get is going to depend on which GPU you go with. Now, this is supposed to be the entry to mid-level gaming laptop for those of you who either can't or don't want to spend a lot of money on a gaming laptop. And so it starts with an NVIDIA GTX 1050, or you can get a 1050 Ti or the GTX 1060 Max Q, which is the one that we have. The Alienware, the entry-level Alienware, is $13.99 for the list price, and that one starts with a GTX 1060 overclockables versus the Max Q that's in ours, which is about 10% lower performance than a regular GTX 1060. But ours starts at $849, so that makes it a pretty friendly proposition in terms of pricing. If you do go with that model, then you get a Core i5. You only get a hard drive, no boot SSD in it, and you get 8 gigs of RAM, but it has 2 RAM slots, so you can upgrade it yourself. Now that RAM is so expensive, often manufacturers get a better price than we can at retail, so you might actually choose to have Dell do the upgrade for you. If you order from them, say you go even with 8 gigs of RAM. You can get it as a single 8 gig module if you know that you want to upgrade it yourself. That way you don't have to throw away any RAM. Just put another 8 gig module in and you're good. Or you can get it with 2 4s if you aren't intending to upgrade it, or you can get it with 16. You get the idea. Our model being the, again, $1,050-ish model, which is pretty nicely in point. It has the same Intel 8th generation 6-core 45-watt Core i7-8750H CPU that you would get in much more expensive gaming laptops. So that's pretty cool. It does start with that Core i5. You can even get it with the Core i9, which is still a 6-core, and generate even more heat, but you could overclock it. We're going to talk about the thermals later on this. I'm not so sure I would do that Core i9, though. Again, you have 2 RAM modules inside, so you can upgrade it yourself going all the way up to 32 gigs, and you can see the rest of the specs. The important thing to know is it has one M.2 SSD bay and ships with a SATA SSD. I don't know if it supports PCIe, NVMe, the faster one, but if you're starting to get into those fancy things, you might be thinking about a higher-end laptop anyway. It has a 5400 RPM 1 terabyte hard drive. Now, say for example, you did go with the base model of the Alienware 15-inch. That one has a 7200 RPM hard drive, so a little bit faster on the spinning disk. You can obviously replace that with a 2.5-inch SSD if you want to, just to have faster game load times and all that sort of thing. Bezels on this are pretty darn, traditionally large on it. And for the price, again, we're not expecting what you would get in a much more expensive laptop. And you have a standard 60 hertz refresh display, no 144 hertz. That's the trend with the high-end gaming laptops. That's pretty acceptable. As always with Dell's gaming line, you know, the non-Alienware one, the displays are, and then they have a 4K option that's kind of, nice. So we have that option. At least it's an IPS panel, so there's that. Gone are the days when they were using really TN panels. And it's a full HD 1920 by 1080 display, and the brightness is pretty weak at 226 nits. The RGB and Adobe RGB, sRGB and Adobe RGB coverage is pretty darn weak. Now, if you're spending this much on a regular Ultrabook, you would get full sRGB coverage, for example. With gaming laptops, because the money is going towards other things like the more expensive CPU and other things, that's why you don't get as nice a display. But this one is pretty mediocre in terms of the metrics. That said, if you look at it when you're playing games on, it looks pretty darn decent. Color calibration is pretty off. It's way too blue-white. But you can fix that with color calibration, so not as bad as it could be. So the display is not the highlight here, but it's not hideous either. The keyboard, the good news is it has a really crisp, kind of clicky feel to it. You know, not mechanical keyboard level, but definite, precise, I feel the switch being actuated kind of a sensation. And that makes it easier to type on. But it is abysmally low travel. I'm not a fan of low travel keyboards. That's a personal thing. You may like them okay. Certainly not a keyboard you would want to game on necessarily, because there's just not a lot of tactile feel with such low travel, though you get that clickiness there. And in some, but not all regions, I don't know why, you get blue backlighting instead of, I guess, no backlighting. Dell's website's a little bit vague on that. Anyway, we have the blue backlighting, we have the number pad on. The trackpad uses Microsoft drivers, and it's quite pleasant to use. No complaints there at all. The port selection on this is pretty good. You have HDMI 2.0, so you can do 4K output at 60 frames per second, good times there. You have USB-C/Thunderbolt 3, one of those ports, and it's full 40 gigabit per second, 4 lanes. So that's max throughput. If you want to use an external graphics amplifier later down the road, or a Dell dock, or any brand of Thunderbolt 3 dock, you can do that. Plenty of traditionally USB-A 3.1 ports as well, so good stuff there. And you have an SD card slot. Yay. The speakers on this are actually pretty good. They're certainly not any worse than $2,000 gaming laptops that we've reviewed recently. In fact, they might be a little louder and a little bit fuller, a little bit more on the bass side than the usual Waves Max audio that Dell likes to use. So no problems with those at all. Intel 9560 Wi-Fi, so it's a pretty good Wi-Fi card that you get in there. Dell used to undercut the Wi-Fi card and go with the cheapest Intel card for the Inspiron Gaming Edition line, so that's improved as well. And you get Bluetooth 5.0, which is sweet. In terms of performance, the news is pretty much good, as you might expect. Like I said, you get the same Core i7 6-core CPU that you would get in a much more expensive gaming laptop, and the CPU performance shows us just that. Now we have the GTX 1060 Max-Q edition, which is the lower power, about 10% lower performance than a regular GTX 1060 graphics card, and that's the highest you can go. It starts with the 1050, like I said, and you got the 1050 Ti option as well. And it has NVIDIA Optimus, so it has switchable graphics. So it'll switch between integrated graphics if you're just doing regular everyday productivity work or streaming video, and the dedicated GPU if you're doing Adobe Premiere or you're gaming and that sort of thing. Now, the heat and the noise, I was hoping the 1060 Max-Q might be a little bit easier on things, especially because the chassis on this is pretty large. The cooling is decent on it. No doubt some better thermal paste would help the situation, but oh my God, I don't know. The 6-core Intel 8th generation CPUs are just heat monsters, you know? It's here I was thinking some of those super thin and light models that we were reviewing recently, like the Razer Blade 15 that were running so high. It's because, well, they're very thin, you know, you got a metal chassis, transfer. Well, this one, you won't feel as hot to the touch because it has mostly plastic chassis. Their inner roll cage, so to speak, the supporting areas are magnesium alloy, but the stuff that you touch, top and bottom, are plastic. Gets very hot above the multimedia row of keys, gets quite hot on the bottom when you're gaming. Yeah, otherwise, if you're just doing normal stuff, no. But the casing temperature isn't that bad. Really, you probably don't want to game ever with a gaming laptop in your lap, but this is not that burning hot. But the core temperatures on this would approach 100 degrees centigrade, which is max allowable. So throttling kicks in, otherwise the machine would have to shut down to preserve the health of the CPU. So it's not doing any better than the super thin and lights. It might be even doing a little worse, in part perhaps because Dell is not very aggressively thermal throttling this, which is, I guess, nice. They let you go for broke with it, but boy, you know, playing Far Cry, I was hitting 97, 98, 100 degrees centigrade on that core package temperature for the CPU. Woof. Not so great. The GPU, as always, is less of a problem. Those temperatures typically are 75 to 80 at most centigrade, which is perfectly acceptable. Now, the noise on this is a gaming laptop. When you're gaming, it's going to make noise. It's going to make plenty of noise. You're going to hear the fans. That's the price you pay for having a gaming laptop that's not 2 inches thick. And even then, they're not that quiet. The cooling system does seem to be effective. It exhausts the air out the back very well. The hot air, you can feel it. It has lots of vents on the bottom side. And it does do better if you raise it up on a laptop chiller cooler. It could be a passive one without a fan even, but just raising it up is going to certainly help with the temperatures. But yeah, it's just a hot little devil still for those core temperatures. So in another way, that this is like last year's gaming laptops when they went with the sort of thin and light designs, not uber thin and light. How did they do it? Well, basically, they cut the battery capacity in half, or almost. Especially if they're going to leave room for the hard drive bay, which this one has, and arguably some people need a large storage system that doesn't cost a lot of money, a hard drive. But anyway, you got a 56 watt-hour battery. That's about what you would find in your standard 13-inch Ultrabook these days. So as you can guess, even with NVIDIA Optimus switching to integrated graphics, battery life is still not going to be that good. This is going to be your 4-hour laptop if it's unplugged. Just doing normal everyday productivity, streaming video with brightness set to 150 nits, which in the case of this is actually 2/3 of the way up because it's a pretty dim display. And with all gaming laptops, not just the Dell, it has nothing to do with the G7, they all run slower when they're unplugged, basically to save battery power because the battery life would be that short. So if you play games unplugged, you'll see your frame rates drop a lot. There's nothing wrong. It's just the way the power management system works. Oh, by the way, if you want it to run quieter, the original idea of Max-Q was to have it not run so hot and so loud. There is the NVIDIA GeForce Experience. You can download and install that if it's not pre-installed. And you can choose the whisper mode, which will cut the frame rate down. You can choose to 60 frames per second, for example. So it can limit noise some and heat. So after you remove the one screw, you take off the whole bottom cover here, and Dell's been doing that for a while, but watch out, the plastic clips aren't as ruggedized as they used to be, and a couple of ours actually snapped off on the bottom cover. Anyway, inside you have your usual 2 fans here, and heatsink is showing here. 2 RAM slots, so a maximum of 32 gigs of RAM. We have our Intel Wi-Fi card right there. Your coin cell battery, backup battery, the SSD slot, and a 2.5-inch hard drive bay. And of course, this big black thing right here is the battery. Now, it's sort of like an Alienware these days in terms of design. You're going to have to unscrew more Phillips head screws and take off this chassis if you actually wanted to get to the heatsink, say you want to repaste it or something like that in the future. As usual with the Inspiron Gamer and with the Alienware as well, everything is really well marked. They even have instructions on which screws to remove when you're servicing the hard drive. Every single cable is marked on this thing. Boy, it is tidy, and they're making life easy for people who do open it up. So that's the Dell G7. Again, the evolution of the Inspiron Gaming Edition now getting its own name. And as ever, it's a pretty nice laptop for those who are looking into introductory or mid-level gaming laptops. It's got a solid build on it, which adds to the weight. There's that. But it does have Thunderbolt 3. It has a nice 4K display option if you're willing to spend the money on that, and it's very expandable. You can tinker with this and upgrade it. You get upgradable RAM, you can upgrade your SSD, your hard drive, you get the idea there. It's pretty decent stuff. Of course, it doesn't live in a vacuum. There are competitors like the Acer Nitro 5 that we'll be reviewing soon as well, which typically run even a little bit less expensive. I'm Lisa from MobileTechReview. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool gaming laptop reviews, and thumbs up if you like this vid.